He thought his twin daughters were lost, forever gone from his life, vanished into the shadows of grief. But 3 years later, on a crowded bus, he heard their voices singing together, alive and unbroken. What he didn't expect was the truth waiting beneath that song, a truth that shattered not just his heart, but his entire world before the story even began. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if these stories touch your soul, don't forget to subscribe. Now, sit back and let the journey begin. The sky wasn't blue the day it happened. It was gray and thick and low, like it had something heavy to say and couldn't get the words out. I remember thinking it was strange that the birds had gone quiet. Even the wind had gone still. Nothing moved except the smoke that rolled in before the fire came. It didn't howl or rage. It crept, soft and steady, like it had done this before. I was 6. Nearly 7, but I felt older the moment I smelled burning hair and wood. I didn't cry when I saw the first flames licking up the porch beams. I didn't even scream when I saw my brother lying face down in the yard, arms sprawled like broken wings. I just stood there in my bare feet, dress soaked from the bucket I'd carried from the well earlier that morning. The bucket was still in my hand, useless. Mama's voice had vanished with the first crack of a rifle, and Papa never had time to draw his. Our house wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a shed, but it was ours. It had warm light in winter, and a rocking chair that creaked like a tired old man. Now it was a pyre. The roof collapsed before I could blink. The shed popped with the sound of glass and jars breaking inside. Pickles, preserves, gunpowder. None of it mattered anymore. I don't know how long I stood there, watching the world end. I remember the heat on my cheeks and the way the smoke danced like ghosts. I remember the silence afterward, thicker than any noise. And then I remember the baby. Not a sound at first, just a rustle. A whimper, maybe? I thought it was the fire playing tricks, the way it plays when your ears ring from too much grief. But it wasn't. Something moved in the rubble. Something alive. I stepped over the charred remains of Mama's herb garden, skirted the half-burned beam that used to hold up the porch, and followed the sound. It was coming from the east side, near the broken fence where Papa kept the mule tied up at night. The ground was black, still smoking, but the noise grew clearer. Not a cry, not yet. Just the sharp, shallow breathing of something trying not to be noticed. And then I saw him. He was so small I thought he was part of the dirt. A bundle of hide and ash wrapped so tight I could barely see his face. But his chest moved, fast and frantic, and his eyes big, dark. Too old for his size, blinked once at me, then again. His skin was darker than mine, his cheeks smudged with soot and something redder. A baby who didn't belong here. I knew what he was before I even touched him. Apache. That's what they whispered when something went missing in town. That's what they shouted when the preacher warned us about the devil walking in skin. That's what they blamed for everything bad they couldn't explain. Apache said like a curse, said like a warning. But when I picked him up, he didn't feel like either. He was warm, fragile, real. I didn't think. My hands moved on their own, peeling back the layers of hide, checking the tiny limbs for wounds. He was sick, hot to the touch. His breath too fast. There was a wound on his side, not fresh, but not healed. Dried blood crusted his wrap. He whimpered again, lips dry and cracked. I dipped the hem of my dress into a water barrel that had survived the blaze and pressed it to his mouth. He drank like he hadn't had water in days. And just like that, he was mine. Not because I claimed him, but because no one else would. Because in the middle of smoke and ruin and silence, he was the only thing left alive that could look back at me. I didn't tell anyone. When the townspeople came too late to help, just in time to gather stories, I buried the baby under my shawl and told them nothing. Sheriff Marsh asked questions, squinting through the smoke like it might explain something. The preacher muttered prayers under his breath. No one touched me. No one came close. I think they were afraid of what had touched me. I let them believe I was alone. They took me back to town in the back of a wagon. The baby never made a sound. I kept him hidden in the folds of my blanket, my hand pressed over his chest. I told myself I'd find someone to help him. A healer. A woman with soft hands in a kitchen that smelled like tea. But as the wheels turned and the dirt road swallowed the past, I knew I couldn't trust them. Not with him. They'd see his skin. They'd see his beads. They'd see an enemy, not a child. So I kept him. I fed him drops of goat milk from a cloth. I tucked him under my bedroll at night. I sang to him in whispers so quiet even the walls didn't hear. No one knew, not yet. But secrets don't stay quiet in small towns. It started with glances, then whispers, then questions about why I walked so carefully, why I wandered the edge of the woods with something cradled in my arms. Tommy Lynn saw me first. He didn't say anything, but he looked long and hard. A week later, the preacher's sermon was louder than usual. "There is evil that walks in flesh," he bellowed, eyes sweeping the pews. "And it finds the weak, the broken, the lonely. It speaks with soft voices and promises peace, but it brings only ruin." They looked at me. Every word felt like a stone against my back. I didn't care what they thought of me. I'd already lost everything, but I cared what they might do to him. The baby I still hadn't given him a name was getting sicker, his breath shallower, his eyes fluttered more than they focused. I stole herbs from the apothecary's shed, hid them in the folds of my dress. I mashed them with a spoon and fed him the paste, hoping some old wisdom would kick in and fix what I couldn't. But time was running out. One night, I woke to footsteps outside my window, men's voices. One of them said witch. Another said traitor. Someone spit. Someone else said we should burn what's left of her too. That was the night I left. I packed what I had, not much. A jar of honey, half a loaf of bread, a small knife Mama kept under her pillow. I wrapped the baby in my old blanket, the one with holes and faded stars. He didn't write a note. He didn't look back. I walked into the woods behind the church and didn't stop. The world was dark and wide and full of sounds I didn't know the names of. But I kept walking, not because I had a destination, just a direction, away. The baby stirred once, his fingers curling around mine. I whispered the only thing I could think of. "I'll keep you safe." It was a promise I wasn't sure I could keep, but I said it anyway. Because in a world full of fire, sometimes the only thing that matters is the hand you reach for when the smoke clears. The forest didn't greet us with open arms. It didn't offer shelter or comfort, didn't whisper words of welcome through the trees. It was just derivist and quiet, full of eyes I couldn't see and sounds I couldn't name. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but waiting. I walked until my legs trembled beneath me. Not because I had anywhere to go, but because I couldn't stay. Each step forward was a step away from fire and suspicion, from the eyes that saw the baby in my arms as a threat instead of a life. I didn't know how far we'd get. I just knew stopping would be worse. The baby, still unnamed, was burning with fever. His breaths came shallow and irregular. Sometimes so light, I held my own just to listen. I carried him close against my chest, wrapped in that old blanket of mine, the one with the stars that had faded like everything else. He didn't cry, not once. He was too weak. The first night, we slept under a fallen tree, the roots jutting up like broken ribs. I tried to build a nest with leaves and moss, the way Mama had once shown me when we played pioneer in the yard. But it wasn't a game now. Nothing about this was play. The air was damp and sharp with the smell of mold and old things growing in dark places. I could hear the forest breathing. That night, I barely slept. Every twig crack was a hunter. Every gust of wind was a ghost. And the baby he twitched in his fever dreams, fists clenched, mouth working against the edge of a moan. I held him and whispered nonsense, sounds without meaning, trying to give him something steady in a world that was anything but. By morning, the bread was gone. I'd eaten just a corner the night before, but hunger isn't polite. It doesn't wait. The jar of honey stayed sealed for now. I knew I'd need it later, energy, healing. Something sweet when everything else tasted like ash. I sucked on dry leaves just to feel something in my mouth. We moved slow. The baby's weight grew heavier, though I knew he wasn't gaining anything. My arms ached. My feet blistered. My dress, already torn from the fire, snagged on branches and thorns until it looked more like a rag than clothing. I didn't care. Vanity dies quickly when survival is all you have. The second night, it rained. Not gentle, storybook rain but cold. Sharp needles that soaked the skin and made the ground slick. I found a dip in the rocks that offered some shelter, though water still pooled around our ankles. I used my body to shield him, curling around his tiny frame, whispering into his ear, "You're okay, you're okay," like saying it enough could make it true. It didn't. His fever got worse. By the third morning, his lips had turned gray-blue. His skin looked thinner than paper. I tried to feed him drops of honey mixed with rainwater, but he barely swallowed. My heart thudded so loud I could feel it in my throat. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't a healer. I wasn't even a grown-up. Just a girl with blood under her fingernails and a baby she wasn't supposed to love. But I loved him. I didn't know when it had started, maybe in the rubble. Maybe on that first silent wagon ride, but it was there now. Rooted in my chest. A knowing. A bond. He wasn't mine by blood or law, but he was mine in every way that mattered. And I couldn't let him die. I had to find help. But help meant people. And people meant risk. Still, I couldn't watch him slip away in the arms of silence. So I chose a direction and began to walk faster. I searched for sin smoke, fences, any trace of human life. What I found instead was a creek. Small, shallow, winding through the trees like a silver thread. The water was clean. Cold. I dipped his feet into it, then his cloth, cooling his body the way Mama once cooled my brothers when the fever hit him. I stayed by that creek for 2 days. On the fourth night, I almost gave up. The baby's breathing had slowed. His chest barely moved. His fingers didn't grasp anymore. I sat with him in my lap under a tree with bark so thick it felt like armor, and I cried. Not loud, not sobbing. Just slow, silent tears that slid down my cheeks and dripped onto his tiny hands. I cried for Mama, for my brother, for a house that no longer stood, for a name I didn't know, for the baby who might never open his eyes again. And then, somewhere deep in the night, something happened. I heard a sound. Not the wind, not the animals. It was soft, familiar, human. A voice. Far off, muffled by trees, but real. I stiffened. My first instinct was to run, to hide. But something held me still. Hope, maybe, or desperation. I stood slowly, cradling the baby against me, and moved toward the sound. It took nearly an hour of walking before I saw a fire. Small, controlled, not a burning house, not an angry mob, a campfire. Orange glow flickering against the trunk of a pine. And near it, a figure. Alone. An old woman. Her back was to me, gray braid trailing down her spine like a piece of rope. She stirred something in a pot with a carved wooden spoon. I watched her for a long time, heart pounding in my chest. Then I stepped forward, just enough to break a branch beneath my foot. She turned. Her face was lined, weathered like leather left in the sun. But her eyes sharp, piercing found me instantly. They didn't widen, they didn't soften. She just looked, the way wolves look at movement in the dark, calculating. I stepped closer. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I just held out the baby in trembling arms, every part of me screaming inside. Help him. She rose, slow but sure, and crossed the space between us. Her hands, when they took him, were warm, steady. She unwrapped the blanket, glanced at the fever-flushed skin, the wound, the fragile limbs, her brow furrowed. She looked at me. Yours? I nodded. She nodded back. Nothing more was said. She took us in. That night, I sat beside her fire and watched her work. She crushed roots with the back of her spoon, mixed powders from little leather pouches, heated water. She worked with quiet purpose, not looking at me, not asking questions, The kind of woman who's seen too much to be surprised anymore. When she fed the baby her brew, he gagged at first, then drank, a little, then more. And when he finally slept, really slept, I let myself breathe. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the fire, watched the old woman's steady hands, watched the baby's chest rise and fall. The forest didn't care if I was brave. It didn't care that I was a girl, or that I'd saved a child, or that I'd lost everything. But maybe the old woman did. Maybe she saw something worth saving in us both. In the morning, she spoke again. "You'll need to keep moving." I knew she was right. We left at dawn. The old woman didn't wake me with words. She simply set a bowl of broth beside where I slept and sat sharpening a knife by the fire. The rhythmic scrape of metal on stone pulling me from half-dreams. The baby was still asleep, cheeks slightly less pale. The fever cooled, though not entirely gone. His little fists twitched as though grasping for something unseen. I drank the broth in silence. It tasted of roots and smoke, bitter but warm. The kind of warmth that lingers in your belly long after you've swallowed. She spoke only once that morning, eyes never leaving the blade she honed. "You'll need to head east. There's a path through the lowlands. Quiet. Safe mostly, but not for long." I nodded. I didn't ask how she knew I was being hunted. Maybe she saw it in my eyes. Or maybe she'd seen enough fugitives pass through her stretch of the forest to stop being surprised. Before I left, she handed me a small pouch of dried herbs, a flat stone carved with symbols I didn't recognize, and a wooden spoon. "Steep the herbs in hot water if the fever comes back," she said. And the spoon well. Sometimes having something old to hold is more useful than having something sharp. I didn't understand then, but I took them. As we stepped back into the trees, I glanced over my shoulder. She didn't wave, didn't offer a goodbye. She just sat back down and resumed stirring the ashes, as though we'd never been there. I think that's what I liked about her. She didn't pretend. The forest changed as we moved east. The pines grew thinner, giving way to crooked birches and scrub brush. The light shifted, tulus golden, more gray. Mist curled low along the ground in the early hours, and everything smelled damp and earthy, like the breath of something ancient. I followed animal trails where I could, paths trampled by deer or boar. Sometimes they led to streams, sometimes to dead ends. I walked until the baby stirred, then rested and fed him with what little I had left, mostly water and drops of honey. A few dried berries I found hanging stubbornly on a bush. He was eating again, which felt like a kind of miracle. The second night, I heard voices, distant, echoing through the trees. Not close enough to make out words, but too clear to be imagined. I froze, held my breath, pressed my back against the trunk of a tree and pulled the baby close. He was quiet somehow, always quiet when it mattered most. The voices passed, faded, but they returned the next night. They were searching, not just for anyone, for me. It was in the way they called out, short clip tones, the way they paused to listen, the way the dogs barked and then fell silent as if ordered to stay on leash until scent was confirmed. I ran, not all at once, not recklessly, but carefully, choosing paths animals wouldn't tread, moving through water when I could, even masking our scent with mud like I'd once seen my brother do when playing war games in the fields. I slept in fits, ate in fragments, hid more than I walked. Still, they were getting closer. Then, on the 5th day after we'd left the old woman, I found a cabin. Or rather, what had once been a cabin. It was collapsed on one side, roof caved in, windows gone. But the back half still stood, shielded by tall reeds and brush, half swallowed by vines. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I crept in through the side, stepping over rotted wood and mold-stained fabric. The baby whimpered in the cold, so I found a place near the wall where the wind didn't bite so sharp and laid him down on my blanket. He was too light, bones under skin, but his eyes opened when I touched his cheek, and that was enough. I spent 2 days in that ruin. I boiled water in an old tin pot I found in the wreckage, using the herbs the woman gave me, bathed the baby carefully, watching as the color returned to his lips. I dared to hum a lullaby once, quiet and uncertain, and he turned his head toward me, as if the sound meant something. That night, I dreamed of Mama. She was standing in the doorway of our old house, hair pulled back, apron dusted with flour. But when I ran to her, she stepped aside, and there behind her was fire, the whole house burning. And in her arms, she held the baby. Only it wasn't a baby anymore. It was a bundle of ash, wrapped in cloth. I woke up screaming into my fist, afraid I'd given away our position. But there were no voices outside. No dogs. Just the wind rattling through broken beams. Still, I knew we couldn't stay. The next morning, I left a piece of my dress tied to the doorframe. A marker, in case I ever found my way back. In case someone else like me needed a place to hide. We followed the lowlands, like the old woman said. The land dipped and stretched into long meadows where wild grasses grew taller than my shoulders. It felt open, too open. I moved only at dawn and dusk, avoiding the midday glare. The baby slept more, his breathing easier now, but still weak. At one point, I heard horses. 3 of them. They didn't see me. I crouched low behind a fallen log, pressing my body flat into the earth. The baby didn't make a sound. The riders were dressed in dark coats, wide-brimmed hats pulled low. Not locals. Not farmers. Hunters. I knew that look. They passed without pause, but I could feel the tension humming in the air long after they disappeared. Like something had shifted. Like the noose was tightening. By the 7th day, I was running on instinct alone. Food was gone. My limbs ached. The baby had started coughing again, a dry, sharp sound that made me panic each time. I pressed my fingers to his chest at night just to feel the rise and fall. I began talking to him more. Not because I expected an answer, but because the silence was too loud. I think your people are east of here, I told him. That's what she said. The old woman. She knew something. I could tell. Maybe she's seen your kind before. I didn't say what I really feared, that they might not want him either. That even if we made it across the land, through the forest and out of reach of the ones who hunted me, his own people might turn their backs. See a child left behind in battle as a curse, not a blessing. But I couldn't believe that. I wouldn't. Because if I stopped believing there was something good at the end of this, then what was the point? On the 8th night, I saw the fire again. Not a campfire this time. All village. Far off, nestled at the edge of the forest's reach, a cluster of lights blinking like stars fallen to earth. I dropped to my knees when I saw it. Not in prayer, but in exhaustion. The baby stirred in my arms, and I whispered, "We're close. I think we're close." But the lights meant people, and people meant choices. The kind that couldn't be undone. From the ridge above the meadow, I saw the lights again the following night. They blinked steady and warm in the dark valley below. Like a handful of stars had tumbled from the sky and settled between the trees. It looked peaceful, quiet, but I didn't trust it. I watched from the tree line for a long time, crouched low, every muscle tense. The baby stirred in my arms, still too weak to cry properly, but stronger than he'd been days ago. He blinked slowly up at me, then closed his eyes again. I didn't know if it was sleep or surrender. That night, I didn't go down. I built a small lean-to from branches and lay in the dirt with him pressed against my chest, listening to the wind rattle through the dry grass. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw torchlight, heard the shouts of the men from my village, felt again the rumble of hooves on the ground. My feet were covered in blisters now. My arms were sore from carrying him. The joints in my fingers ached from cold and strain, but we were closer than ever. I could feel it in the way the wind carried voices up the hillside at night. Laughter. Singing even. Whoever lived down there was alive, human, and I hoped they were kinder than the ones who'd taken everything from me. But I'd learned by now that kindness was not something to expect. So I waited. By morning, a soft mist had rolled in across the meadow. The valley below was half hidden, the lights gone now in the daylight, replaced by smoke tendrils rising from what must have been chimneys. From this distance, the buildings looked small, rounded and low to the ground, their roofs sloping like moss-covered hills. I counted no more than 20. Not a city. Not even a town. A village. There were fences too, wooden ones, winding in circular patterns that reminded me more of nests than barriers. This place wasn't built for war. It looked old, protected but not dangerous. I waited until the mist thickened. Then I moved. I wrapped the baby in the last dry cloth I had and tucked him tightly to my chest, inside my coat. His breath was warm against my skin. He made no sound. The descent into the valley was slow. The slope was muddy from the night's dew, and I had to move carefully to avoid sliding. I followed the edge of the trees as long as I could, circling until I reached a point where a narrow animal path cut between the brambles and led down toward the buildings. There were no guards, no watchmen, only a cluster of people moving through the center of the village, carrying baskets, tending fires, walking slowly as if time moved differently here. I stopped just before the last stretch of open space. From here, I could hear them more clearly. Their voices weren't sharp like the ones back home. They rose and fell like wind through reeds, soft and musical, with syllables I didn't understand. I wondered if this was the baby's language. If it had ever been spoken to him, I couldn't go forward. Not yet. So I turned back and circled around the edge of the village, searching for a place to hide nearby. I found a small hollow between two boulders, just beyond the last fence. From here, I could see enough without being seen. That's where I stayed for the next 2 days. Watching, listening, waiting. I learned their rhythm. They rose with the light and gathered in the center of the village, where smoke rose from a great pit of earth that glowed faintly with embers. They cooked over it. They sang. They told stories I could tell from the way they sat in circles, hands moving with the words. In the afternoons, the children ran through the grass, their laughter high and bright. I counted 6, maybe 7. The youngest was about 4, the oldest perhaps 12. None looked like the baby in my arms. At night, they lit the fire again. Not for warmth, it was summer now, but for ceremony. Some nights they danced, other nights they sat silently, the fire's glow reflecting in their eyes. There was one figure who always stood apart. A woman, tall, thin, with hair like silver threads that caught the light even when the sun was low. She never laughed, never sang. She stood at the edge of every gathering, watching. I thought at first she might be a leader, but no one spoke to her directly. No one bowed. They simply gave her space. There was something in her stillness that reminded me of the old woman from the forest. But colder. I watched her closely, and on the third night she looked straight at me. Not in passing, not by accident. She turned her head slowly and met my gaze from across the field, through the trees. I froze. She didn't move, didn't call out. She just stared for a long moment, and then turned back to the fire. That night I couldn't sleep. The baby's fever returned, subtle but enough to worry me. His skin was warm and dry, his breath fast. I boiled water using a tin cup and a small fire I built from dry moss and bark. I used the herbs the old woman had given me, but they were running low. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had to go down, not in the light of day, not with all eyes watching, but in the quiet hour just before dawn, when the sky is pale and the birds haven't begun to sing. I waited for the moon to sink low behind the hills. Then I wrapped the baby in my blanket and crept down the slope, one slow step at a time. The village was silent. No fires, no voices. I made it past the first fence without sound. The houses were strange up close made, not from cut wood but woven branches and clay. They looked like they had grown from the earth rather than been built. I passed 2 without seeing anyone, then a third, then a shadow moved. I stopped. The silver-haired woman stood in the path ahead. She said nothing, just stood, watching me. I stepped back, heart racing, the baby clutched tight. Still, she said nothing. She raised one hand slowly, then pointed to the left toward the last hut at the edge of the village. Then she turned and disappeared into the shadows. I didn't know if it was a warning or a welcome, but I went where she pointed. The hut was smaller than the others. Its roof sagged slightly on one side. Inside it was warm. Someone had lit a fire earlier. It was down to embers now, but enough to see. A bed sat in one corner. A wooden bowl. A cup. Nothing else. I laid the baby down on the softest spot I could find and checked his fever. Still high, but not worse. He slept deeply. I sat beside him, knees pulled to my chest, waiting for someone to come. No one did. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not even when I opened the door to peer outside. The village moved as it always had. No one looked at me. No one spoke. But no one chased me out either. I was invisible. Or maybe not. Maybe they already knew why I was here. Maybe they'd been waiting for us. I stayed in that hut for 3 nights, though I lost track of time after the second. The days blended into each other, dim, hushed, and strange. No one spoke to me. No one came to take me away. They didn't feed me, but they didn't stop me from taking water from the well or picking fruit from the trees that grew around the village edge. I was invisible, and I didn't know if that was mercy or cruelty. The baby's fever came and went like a tide, rising in the afternoons and sinking into his skin again by dawn. I never left his side. I barely slept. His breath was shallow, but steady, and I clung to that rhythm like a rope stretched across a canyon. I told myself that as long as he breathed, I had a reason to stay. I listened to the people outside my door, how their voices changed when they passed my hut, how they never looked inside. They knew I was there. I didn't believe for a moment that I had gone unnoticed. The silver-haired woman had seen to that. On the 4th morning, when I stepped out to gather water, I found something waiting for me. A bowl of warm broth, still steaming, and beside it, a strip of cloth soaked in herbs I didn't recognize. They hadn't left it for me. They had left it for him. I took it inside, trembling, and fed the baby what I could with my fingers. He swallowed slowly, weakly, but he didn't spit it out. The herbal cloth I laid gently across his forehead. It smelled sharp, like the bark of trees after rain. That was the first time I allowed hope to breathe inside me again. By the 6th day, the baby's fever broke. His skin cooled, his breathing deepened, his tiny fingers curled into my coat, and for the first time since the fire that had taken my home, he opened his eyes and held them open. They were deep brown, almost black, and they were watching me. Something in that look settled in my bones like a stone in a quiet river. He blinked. I whispered his name, Least, the one I'd given him in my head. I didn't say it aloud, not really, just a breath of it, into the space between us, but I felt it settle into the air like a secret only we shared. He didn't cry. He didn't smile. He just watched. And I understood in that moment that we were bound now, not by blood, not even by choice, but by survival. By the long silence we'd walked through together, I had saved him, but he had also saved me. On the 7th day, the silver-haired woman returned. She didn't knock. She didn't announce herself. I turned, and she was simply there, standing inside the doorway, her silhouette outlined by the evening light behind her. She carried nothing, said nothing. I stood between her and the baby, my body stiff and ready, though I had no idea what I would do if she meant harm. I had no weapon, no strength left. But she didn't come closer. Instead, she knelt slowly by the doorway and placed her hand on the ground, palm down, fingers spread wide like roots searching for the earth. Her eyes met mine, and they held something strange in neither threat nor welcome. Recognition? Maybe. Then she nodded once, very slightly, and left. The next morning, I found a blanket on my doorstep. It was made of thick wool, dyed in deep earthy colors, and stitched with a symbol I didn't recognize. Triangles overlapping in a spiral. I draped it over the baby and sat beside him as the wind picked up outside. The people here were not speaking to me, but they were speaking around me, and I was beginning to learn their language in silence. It was on the 9th day that I left the hut for more than a few minutes. The baby was stronger now. He slept more soundly, fed more easily. He followed me with his eyes when I moved around the room. And when I left the hut, I kept the door open so I could hear him. I walked slowly through the village paths. I didn't go far, just enough to move my body again, to remind my legs that they still existed. The air smelled of smoke and herbs, of earth and dried leaves. Everything in this place felt old, not in a crumbling way, but in a way that whispered it had seen many things before me. Children played in the grass near the far fence. They stopped when they saw me, not out of fear, but curiosity. A little girl with wild braids stepped toward me and stared. I nodded. She tilted her head like a bird, and then ran back to the others. Adults watched from the corners of their homes. Some turned away when I looked. Others met my gaze and held it until I did. I didn't know what they saw in me. An intruder? A ghost? A girl carrying a baby who didn't belong? Or something else entirely? The woman returned again that night. This time, she brought a pouch of herbs and a small carved bowl. She showed me how to crush the herbs, how to boil them, how to press the mixture against the baby's chest. Still without words. Just gestures. Movements, a language of hands and eyes. I followed her instructions. The baby slept deeply that night, with no sign of fever. I tried to speak to her just one word. I don't even remember which. Maybe thank you. Maybe why. But she raised one hand, soft and firm, and I stopped. Whatever answer I wanted, I would not get it yet. It was 2 days later when the boy arrived. I saw him across the village square, taller than the others, with skin darker than mine, eyes like flint. He walked with purpose, confidence. He wasn't a child, but not yet a man. Somewhere in between. That dangerous place where boys think they're invincible and the world hasn't yet proved them wrong. He looked at me like he recognized something. Not me, exactly. But something in me. That scared me more than anything. Because it meant he might start asking questions. And I wasn't ready to answer them. That evening, as I sat outside the hut with the baby bundled in my lap, the boy approached. He stopped a few paces away and crouched low, arms resting on his knees. He didn't speak, just stared at the baby. Then at me. I waited for anger, for accusation, but he only nodded once, then stood and left. That night, I barely slept. I dreamed of footsteps in the dark, of fire again, of hands pulling the baby from me, of voices saying words I didn't understand, but that felt like judgment. I woke before dawn, sweat cold on my back. The baby slept peacefully. Outside, the sky was beginning to pale, and I knew my time in hiding was ending. I had come here to save him, but now, something deeper had begun to shift. I didn't just want to save him. I wanted to understand him, who he was, where he had come from, what those people had done to Minnie and what mine had done to them. The war hadn't started with the fire in my village, and it wouldn't end just because I had carried a baby across the wilderness. If there was ever going to be peace, real peace, it had to begin with truth. But truth was dangerous, and I was about to learn just how dangerous it could be. I had thought the worst was behind Metafire, the screams, the journey through dead silence and cold earth. I had thought that reaching this place meant survival, that the baby's breath returning meant my purpose was fulfilled. But I was wrong. The real journey hadn't started until I opened my ears, until I opened my heart to stories not my own. It began with whispers. They didn't know I understood some of their words, but I did. Language lived in rhythm, and when you've spent long enough listening in silence, you begin to piece the world together through tone and fragments. The boy who'd stared at me in silence's name was Kalik. He was the son of one of the tribe's leaders, though not the chief. Not yet. Too young, too defiant. He walked like someone who didn't fear fire, but hadn't learned how to carry it properly either. He came back the next evening, and the next. He didn't speak, just sat across from me, a little closer each time, sometimes tossing a pebble between his fingers, watching the baby sleep. I started to realize something. He was trying to decide if I was real. Or maybe, if this was real, this strange scene of a girl from the enemy camp cradling one of their own, sitting in the middle of their world as if the war hadn't happened at all. But war leaves a scent, a stain. I could feel it in the way the older women looked at me, the way some men clutched their spears tighter when I passed. They remembered the raids. They remembered our flames too. It wasn't long before Kalek spoke. He said the baby's name. Not a name I knew, not one I'd given, but one that belonged to him before the fire. His name was Anur, Kalek said quietly, not looking at me. His mother was my cousin. The words hit me like stone against bone. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat closed. He didn't accuse me. That was the worst part. There was no blame in his tone, no spit of hatred. Just a heavy truth placed in front of me like a blade between us. Anur. I had called him something else, something I never even dared speak aloud. But now, he had a name that belonged to a world I didn't come from. And suddenly, I felt like I had stolen something sacred. That night, I held Anur tighter than ever. He curled into me, warm and soft and unaware of the weight I carried. I wondered if he remembered her, his mother. Her voice. Her arms. I didn't even know what she looked like. Kalek hadn't said her name. I couldn't bring myself to ask. But a seed had been planted. And seeds, even in scorched earth, know how to grow. Over the next few days, Kalek told me more. It came in pieces. Broken, jagged, like shards of glass washed up from a shattered mirror. He told me that the war hadn't started with a raid. It had started with a lie. Years ago, long before I was old enough to understand, a child from their tribe had gone missing. Some said she drowned, others said she had been taken by us. My people. Retaliation came swiftly. A border burned. A family gone. My people answered in kind. And, like that, fire fed fire. And the children born after, like me, were taught to carry fear like it was armor, taught to hate like it was prayer. But I had never asked why we hated. Not until I carried Anur in my arms and fed him with stolen cloth and dirty fingers. Kalek was still hesitant. He didn't trust me, but he didn't stay away either. He asked about the night of the fire. I told him what I remembered: smoke, silence, the faces I'll never see again. I told him I found the baby in the ruins, near where our watchtower had stood, that I heard a faint cry, like something already half gone. He nodded but didn't look surprised. Then he said something I hadn't expected. We didn't set your fire. He blinked. He said it again, slower. It wasn't us. That night, we were here, preparing for harvest. We lost 3 horses to sickness that same week. No one crossed the border. I stared at him, cold fingers curling around my wrist like vines. But it was your arrows, I whispered. I saw them. In the gate. In the walls. He shrugged, bitterly. Do you know how many tribes use black-feathered shafts? Half the valley. I said nothing. Because I didn't know. Because no one ever told me. Because when the world burned, all I cared about was survival. And now, I wasn't even sure who lit the first match. I began to walk the village more openly. Some began to nod at me. Others still turned their backs. The silver-haired woman Kalek called her Maria brought me more herbs. This time, she let me help prepare them. She didn't speak my tongue, but we found a rhythm, grinding and folding, boiling and cooling. One afternoon, I asked her, gesturing to Anur, what happened to his mother. Maria's hands stopped moving. She touched her chest, then her face, then pointed to the sky. Gone, but not in the fire. Gone before? My stomach turned. I turned to Kalek that evening and asked again. He looked away. She was sick, he said, weak after birth. She wandered into the night one evening and never came back. How long before the fire? I asked. He hesitated. 2 days. So when I found him, alone, crying, no one had come looking? No one thought he was still alive. A horrible possibility bloomed in me then. What if someone knew he was alive? What if they left him on purpose? Todie? Because his mother had died in shame? Because he was seen as a burden? Because something had broken in their hearts? Or worse, what if someone from my village had taken him, planning to use him, as revenge, as a weapon, as bait? I didn't say these things to Kalek, but I saw in his eyes that he was thinking the same. Anur had survived because I was the one who found him. And now, neither tribe knew what to do with that truth. By the 10th day, a meeting was called. Kalek told me in hushed tones. The elders, the hunters, even Maria, they're deciding what happens next, he said. What happens to me, I clarified. He nodded once. I asked if I could go. He shook his head. This is not a room for strangers. I wanted to scream that I wasn't a stranger anymore, that I had walked across death to keep this child alive, that I had fed him, fought for him, sung to him in the dark when there were no stars left. But none of that changed blood. None of that rewrote the old stories still etched in their bones. That night, I sat alone in the hut, Anur sleeping in the crook of my arm. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the wind. I thought about leaving, running again, vanishing into the wild. But I was tired of running. I had brought this child home, even if home didn't want either of us. The next morning, they summoned me. The elders, Maria, Kalek. I walked into their meeting place with Anur in my arms, his breath warm against my collarbone. They didn't speak for a long time. Then Maria stepped forward. She reached for Anur. I froze. But something in her face-worn, kind, sorrowful calmed me. I let her take him. She held him to her chest, like a memory. And the old woman who hadn't said a word in all the time I'd known her began to sing, a soft, crumbling lullaby. And Anur smiled. For the first time, the room changed after that. Kalek stepped forward and looked me in the eye. And then, for the first time, he asked my name. And for the first time, I told it. They gave me a name that night. Not the one my mother whispered in my ear when the world still made sense. Not the one burned into our village wall in charcoal when we celebrated the solstice, or the one they shouted when they needed water from the stream. They gave me a new name. Not to replace mine, but to bury it under a newer truth. I didn't understand the word at first. It didn't belong to my tongue, but Kalek told me later. It meant the one who came bearing breath. I hadn't realized until then that I'd brought life into a dying place. They didn't accept me that night, not in full, but they didn't send me away either. They made space. Not warmth, not yet, but space is the beginning of peace. Kalek began walking beside me instead of behind me. He told me the names of trees, the old names of stars. He showed me where the tribe once held sacred fires, long before the war began. He even laughed once when I mispronounced the name of a river and accidentally called it Mudmouth. But not all things could be softened. Some men refused to speak when I passed. One spat at the ground when I touched the baby's cheek. Maria warned me to keep to the edges of the village at dusk. There are wounds here that time has not touched, Kalek translated for her. And some believe the child should have died with his mother. The words sickened me. I remembered his breath fragile, fluttering like a broken-winged bird as I pulled him from the ashes. How could anyone see death as more rightful than that? But hatred is old, and sometimes people love their pain more than they love possibility. One morning, Kalek came to me with urgency in his steps, the baby Anura's running a fever again. It wasn't like the first time, when he was barely more than skin and silence. This time he screamed. His tiny body shook with every cry, red-faced and soaked in sweat. Maria came running. She forced herbs down his throat, crushed roots in boiling water, stripped him of his cloth and pressed cool mud against his skin. I held him the whole time. I whispered to him through gritted teeth and tears. I sang the song my sister used to hum when the nights got cold. Don't go, I whispered, though I don't know who I was saying it to. Please, not again. That night he stopped crying, and for a moment, I thought he'd slipped away. But then I heard it. A breath. Deep, wet, but alive. He clung to my thumb with strength I didn't know he had. He was still fighting. The elders sent a runner to the far mountains the next morning. There was talk of a healer who knew how to burn sickness out with smoke and chant. They said she was older than memory, that she lived where the sky kissed the teeth of the earth. I offered to go. Kalik looked at me sharply. It's dangerous. I know the wild, I said, and I know what it is to carry a child through it. He didn't answer at first. Then he said, You'd go alone? I went alone once, I whispered. But not for me. Not this time. They gave me a satchel of dried berries, flint, and cloth soaked in tallow. Maria pressed something into my hand before I left a string of carved bone beads, worn smooth by decades of prayer. Protection, Kalik said. I placed it around Anor's neck, even though he was barely strong enough to keep his head upright. He needs it more than I do. The journey took 2 days. I moved through the ravine paths like ghosts between ribs, keeping to shadows, listening to the wind like it was trying to tell me something important. Anor stayed quiet most of the way, except when the sun grew too hot or the cold crept into our bones. I fed him drops of boiled leaf water and whispered nonsense songs into his ear. I began to think he was listening, that he understood the rhythm, if not the meaning. On the morning of the 3rd day, I reached the ridge they'd spoken of. The sky there was a different kind of blue so wide. It made my chest hurt. Smoke curled from a small stone hut nestled against a cliff face. I approached slowly, stepping around sun-bleached bones and feathers tied to sticks. My fingers trembled. A woman stepped out before I could knock. She was smaller than I expected, bent like an old branch with eyes like the inside of the earth. She didn't ask my name. She simply held out her hands for honor. He hesitated. Then I gave him to her. She held him against her chest, then lifted his eyelids, opened his mouth, placed her palm against his chest, and closed her eyes. Then she turned and walked inside. I followed without being told. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and something sweet berries? Bark? I couldn't place it. The walls were covered in hanging bones, feathers, shells. It looked like someone had built a home out of dreams and broken stories. She lay Anur on a bed of furs and whispered something over him. Then she turned to me. You carry the fire of 2 houses, she said in a strange accent. That burns deep. I didn't understand. She pointed to my chest. 1 heart, 2 histories. I said nothing. She placed a bowl of something thick and dark in my hands and told me to feed Anur with it. I obeyed. He winced at first, but drank. Then again, and again. We stayed the night. I curled around him, and for the first time in days, I slept without fear, chasing my dreams. When I woke, he was breathing easier, his skin cooler, his eyes open. He smiled at me. Not weak, not confused. A real smile. He wept into my palms. The woman gave me 3 pouches before we left: bark, seeds, and something she didn't name. She told me when to use them, how to boil them, how to listen for his breathing. Then she looked at me and said something I will never forget. You are not a stranger to him. You are the thread. I asked what she meant. She didn't answer, just smiled, and went back inside. We returned slower this time. I didn't want to rush fate. When we arrived at the village, a crowd had gathered. Kalik ran to us, eyes wide. I held up Anur, who now gurgled and clapped his tiny hands. The crowd gasped. Someone dropped to their knees. Maria wept openly. I didn't understand why at first, but then I realized they had buried too many children, and this time they were watching one come back. Later that evening, Kalik found me sitting under the old cedar near the edge of the village. He sat beside me in silence. Then he said, They're talking again. The elders. About what? About you. About the boy. About what comes next. I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't need to, because I had seen it in their eyes. Something had shifted. And in that moment, I knew something else. This wasn't the end of my journey. It was the end of theirs. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't meant to go back to the world I came from. Because, perhaps, that world no longer existed. The days that followed blurred into each other like smoke in a storm. Anur grew stronger. His steps turned from staggering to steady, his eyes from glassy to alert. He smiled often, laughed sometimes. He clung to my hand when we walked, and buried his face in my chest when the wind turned cold. But the village didn't stay the same. They watched me now not with suspicion, but with something harder to name. Hope, fear, reverence, doubt. Some mothers brought me berries wrapped in leaves. Some children whispered stories about me behind their fingers, pointing at the bone beads I still wore around my neck. They called me things in their language that Kalik didn't always translate. But he didn't have to. I saw it in their eyes. They didn't know what I was anymore. Neither did I. One morning, Kalik led me to the elders' circle. I had never been inside it before, only watched from a distance, where stones marked the sacred space and fires burned in silence. Maria stood at its edge, holding Anur. Her eyes met mine, but gave nothing away. Kalik said, "They've asked for you." I felt a weight press against my chest. I stepped inside. 5 elders sat in a ring. One man, his hair silver and braided with feathers, motioned for me to kneel. I did. The wind whispered across the flames. "You crossed the divide," he said in a slow, deep voice. "You carried one of ours through the ashes. You kept him breathing when his own blood would not. You sought the woman of smoke, and you brought the child back stronger than before." I waited. "But you are not one of us." I nodded. "I know." "You are a thread," another elder said, echoing the words of the healer. "Tied to both cloths, belonging fully to neither." My voice trembled. "What do you want from me?" The silver-haired man leaned forward. "To choose." "Choose what?" "To stay or to leave. If you stay, you become one of us not only in action, but in name, in law, in spirit. The child is of our blood, but he has your breath. If you leave, you take nothing with you. Not the boy, not the beads, not the name." It felt like the air had been knocked from my lungs. "He's not a thing," I whispered. "He's not something I carry or surrender." "He is both," the elder said. "He is a future, and futures must have roots." My heart slammed inside my chest. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand time. But I knew the truth. There would be no delay. That night, I wandered beyond the outer fires. I sat under the sky, where stars blinked like dying embers, and tried to remember my mother's voice. Tried to picture my village as it had been, before fire and steel, before screams. But all I could see was Anur's tiny hand gripping my finger. All I could hear was his laugh. Kalik found me there. He sat in silence beside me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Do you hate us?" It startled me. I turned. "Why would you ask that?" "Because if you stay, you must love us. Not just tolerate us, not pity us. You must love this place, even the pieces that wounded you." I looked away. "I don't know if I can." He nodded. "Then you cannot stay." My chest burned. "But Anur is ours," he said quietly. "And yours. But not if you leave. You must choose." I buried my face in my hands. Tears spilled hot and fast. The next morning, I stood before the circle again. The sky was pale, the ground cold. The village gathered in silence. Kalik stood at my side. Maria held Anur. The elders waited. I stepped forward, and I said, "I came here in fear. I came carrying something I didn't understand. I thought I was saving a child, but he saved me." The wind picked up. Dust curled around my feet. "I am not what I was. I cannot go back to ashes, but I am not one of you either. Not truly. I do not speak your stories. I do not carry your name, but I carry him." I pointed to Anur. "He is my blood now, not by birth, by bond. And wherever he belongs, I belong too." The silver-haired elder looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded. "Then stay." They marked me that evening, with red clay, not as one of their own, but as something else. A bridge. A fire between two woods. They painted my face with circles and lines. and children danced in a ring around me as drums echoed into the dark. Anur sat on my lap and clapped with every beat. For the first time in years, I laughed without shame. But peace, I learned, is not a forever thing. It is a breath, a pause between storms. 2 nights later, I saw smoke on the northern ridge. Familiar smoke. Too dark, too fast, too thick. Kalik climbed the watch tree and looked through a bone-carved lens. When he came down, his face was pale. "They're coming," he said. "Who?" I asked. He looked at me, and his voice broke. "Your people." The night was thick, with silence too thick, like the world itself was holding its breath. The firelight from the village flickered weakly against the growing darkness beyond the walls. I sat beside Anur, who had fallen asleep on my lap, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. His warmth was the only thing anchoring me to the present, the only comfort in a night that felt like it was about to break apart. Kalik's warning burned in my mind like a fever. "Your people are coming." The words echoed with a weight I couldn't shake. I tried to tell myself it was just a threat, a shadow of the past reaching toward us. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The sky was barely lightening when the first drum sounded. Low, steady, like the heartbeat of an approaching storm. I rose quietly, careful not to wake Anur, and moved toward the watch post where Kalek and others gathered, eyes scanning the horizon. "Where?" I whispered, my voice raw. "North Ridge," Kalek said, voice tight. "They're banners, they're riders too many to count. They're coming fast, and they're angry." I swallowed hard. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to steady them. "They'll see me," I said. "If they see me," Kalek's eyes were grave, "then they might think you've betrayed them." The thought hit me like a blow. Betrayed? Was I a traitor to my own blood? To the land where I was born but could no longer return? The village stirred. People rose from their homes, clutching spears, knives, anything they could find. Mothers gathered their children. The elders chanted old prayers, their voices weaving through the cold air like a shield. I walked through the crowd, feeling the weight of every gaze. Some looked at me with hope, others with fear. I reached the center of the village where Mary awaited, her face pale but strong. "Will they hurt us?" she asked. I shook my head. "I don't know, but we must be ready." Anur stirred, opening his eyes. He saw me and smiled weakly. "Stay close," I whispered, brushing his hair back. "I won't let anything happen to you." Hours later, the war cries shattered the stillness. The first riders appeared on the ridge, like ghosts rising from smoke. Their faces were familiar, hard and unyielding. Warriors who had once been neighbors, friends no enemies. I clenched my fists, my heart pounding. One rider broke from the group and galloped toward us. He was young, with eyes like mine, the same blood. "Anat!" he called out. His voice cut through the chaos. My breath caught. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice trembling. He hesitated. "Orders. The leaders say you're a threat. That you took a child from us." I looked at Anur in my arms. "He is no threat," I said firmly. "He is my son. I am protecting him." The rider's jaw tightened. "That's not how it is." The village prepared for battle, but I felt torn. This was not my fight. Not theirs either, not fully. I looked at Anur and whispered, "We have to find another way." But words were drowned by the clashing of steel and the cries of men. The battle was brutal. Dust and blood mixed with screams and thunder. I saw warriors fall, friends and foes alike. I held Anur close, shielding him from the madness. A spear whizzed past, embedding in the ground beside me. Kalek fought fiercely beside me, his face set in grim determination. "We can't hold them," he shouted over the noise. I knew he was right. In the chaos, I saw the young rider again. He charged toward me, sword raised. I braced for the worst. But then he stopped, lowered his blade. "Anat," he said, breathless. "We don't have to keep fighting." I stared at him, disbelief and hope warring inside me. "Then what?" I asked. "We find a way to end this," he said. "Together." That night, under a shattered sky, we gathered enemies turned uneasy allies. Plans were made. Words spoken with cautious hope. Anur slept peacefully between us. I realized then that the path forward was not through fire or blood, but through courage and trust. The storm had come, but maybe, just maybe, it could pass. The sun had barely risen when the silence finally broke. But this time, it wasn't the silence of fear or waiting. It was the silence that follows a storm's passing the quiet, after the world has been shaken to its core. I sat on a rock, my legs exhausted, the baby asleep against my chest. Anur's breathing was steady now, his fever finally gone. His tiny hand curled around my finger, warm and real. I had carried him through fire, through hate, through the endless dark. And now, here we were, together. The village around us was slowly waking. The broken fences, the smoldering fields, the wary eyes of those who had once turned away, they all told the story of what had been. But what would come next was still unwritten. The rider Calic's brother, Aaron, stood beside me. He had changed during the battle. The cold edge in his eyes was softened, replaced by something I dared to call hope. "We could have lost everything," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. "But maybe we saved more." He nodded. "There's talk of peace now." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Peace," I whispered. A word that felt like a dream. The elders gathered in the center of the village. Their faces were lined with age and grief, but also with something new: acceptance. Chief Rena, a woman whose strength I had only heard about in stories, looked at me directly. "You have walked farther than anyone," she said. "Carried a burden no one asked for. You taught us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it." I blinked back tears. "Anur is not just my son," I said, voice shaking. "He is the bridge between our worlds." There were murmurs, soft and uncertain, but they carried the weight of change. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, walls came down. Where once there was suspicion, now there was dialogue. Where once there was silence, now there was song. I watched as children from both sides played together, their laughter weaving a new kind of story into the land. One evening, I sat by the fire, Anur in my arms. Aaron approached, carrying a small carved box. "I have something for you," he said. Inside was a necklace, simple but beautiful, made of stones from both our lands, woven together. "To remind us," he said, "that what divides us can also unite us." I touched the stones gently, feeling the weight of the moment. It was not just jewelry, it was a promise. But the true victory wasn't in the peace treaties or the ceremonies. It was in the moments no one saw. In Anur's first laugh, in the quiet nights when I no longer feared the shadows, in the hands that reached out to men it with weapons, but with food, with kindness. I thought back to the night I found him, half buried in the ashes. A tiny, fragile life that should have been lost, but wasn't. Because sometimes the smallest hearts carry the greatest strength. Because sometimes love is the fiercest rebellion. As the sun set, painting the sky in flames of gold and purple, I stood at the edge of the valley. Anur asleep on my chest, the future wide open before us. I whispered a vow. "I will protect you, not just from the world, but for the world. Because together, we will be the change. The dawn after the dark, the hope after the silence." And in that moment, I knew, no matter what storms came next, we would face them, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as one. The world had been broken, but it could be healed. Because even in the darkest night, the smallest light can burn bright enough to lead the way. And I, a girl who once was lost in smoke and ruin, had become that light. If you were in their shoes, would you fight the same battle? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and explore the other stories waiting for you on screen.